Welcome to today's webinar as we continue our discussion about PropelZ for Linux, our multi-platform version of PropelZ. Today I have Vince Ray with me, co-founder and CTO of VirtualZ, and I am Dustin Froyam, one of the co-founders of VirtualZ as well. So a couple housekeeping items. This will be available for playback on our YouTube channel and also on our Skyward Data podcast channel. So if you want to just listen to it in an audio only format, you can do that. We'll talk a little bit about the challenges with accessing data from your mainframe today. And in this case, we get to do that from the Linux platform. And then we'll dive deeper into the multi-platform version of PropelZ for Linux, talk a little bit about the use cases, pricing. We'll talk about the installation experience, and we'll get out of here. Okay, so some of the challenges that we see in the marketplace, and I think this will be familiar to a lot of people that are operating, either in data integration or sharing data from their mainframe very specifically. So a lot of times the data in the mainframe gets siloed and it can be hard to integrate, or it can be very costly to integrate, right, through legacy homegrown ETL methods, other commercial ETL products. But those have limitations, and we'll talk a little bit about the PropelZ capabilities that overcome those. Sometimes AI lacks access or near real-time access to data, and so that can make, especially if you're making decisions on that data from an AI BI perspective in your intraday business, that can be pretty challenging. And so we'll address how we tackle that problem as well. The data integration can be costly and slow. Vince, maybe we'll talk about some of our customer experiences we've heard around that, either with implementing some other solutions or just getting to the mainframe data and kind of a legacy ETL perspective. Replicating sensitive data without risks, and we'll talk a little bit about how we deal with those challenges as well. And integration requires scarce specialized talent, especially on the mainframe side, right? Do you really want them just dealing with serving up data and those types of things versus really concentrating on core business operations? And how do you get some of the data in formats to integrate? And so we'll go through all of those as we go. So Vince, I'm going to ask you to talk a little bit about our architecture and capabilities, and I'll maybe ask some questions along the way here as we dive into what PropelZ really is and how it works and what makes it different in the market.
Yeah, sure. Happy to go any direction you like. So PropelZ is our solution for data replication. Some of our other products are about live data sharing. PropelZ is a replication solution. In other words, we take data that might reside on really any platform, mainframe, wherever it happens to be. We transform it to make it more useful and then store it on whatever target you have in mind. The most common thing we do with PropelZ is, typically we're dealing with, file system objects of some sort. So, that could be just binary files. That could be, on ZOS, that's very commonly VSAM data or GDGs or tape files or, all these other file formats that are very common there. So that tends to be the input side. The processing we do on that data really just depends what your needs are. Certainly, we have some customers who tell us, hey, I just want bit for bit a copy of that data somewhere else, in a database or in a cloud platform or whatever it is. And absolutely we can do that. But probably more commonly we hear the need for here's a little bit of metadata that describes what my records look like. transform that binary file into rows and columns and then store it somewhere. And typically when you're doing that, the store it somewhere is going to be a relational database or some type of database. We can talk to anything that's got a JDBC interface available to it. We provide a handful of those out of the box, but certainly you're free to use any JDBC environment that you like. So that means we can populate data into, there's probably 100 different types of databases that we can go to. We can also do other things besides databases. An example is, you'll find another video that we did that talks about requirement we heard from another earlier customer, that what they wanted to do is take alerts and system messages and console traffic and all of that kind of stuff and archive it into a product like Splunk. Now, in that case, that's not a JDBC into a database. That's basically take that data, convert it into a JSON or XML format, and then invoke an API, store it by calling a Splunk API in this case. So, we're very open-ended that way. You can actually plug in really almost anything on the output side. If you want to go to JDBC, that's probably a little simpler. You just tell us how to connect and some of the parameters there. If you want to go to something other than that, it really just depends what you're looking to connect to, how complicated that is. You guys can do that. Anybody can develop that. Another vendor could develop a plugin to PropelZ that lets us connect to anything. We can do it for you with some type of services arrangement there. It's not heavy lifting, and it's the type of thing that you would do once and it would support whatever data comes through PropelZ. So same is true, by the way, on the input side. I talked about file system objects, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that. In my example of archiving ZOS console messages to Splunk, those inputs aren't files. They're not, go read a ZOS database or something like that. That's basically invoke a ZOS internal API to access the console messages and then treat that like output. So, it's possible on the input side also. You can have just about any type of input by supplying an input stage to PropelZ that does whatever you want it to do. So that opens the door to, if there are data types that we don't support, or unusual databases, or maybe you don't even want that kind of data. Maybe what you want to do in PropelZ is take the output of an application and then essentially pipe that to the cloud or to a database, or whatever target you want. That's really what PropelZ is structured to do. And then in the early days of PropelZ, everything I just described was specific to ZOS. You would run PropelZ. The usual rule is run it where your data is. So if you've got a ZOS system with vSpot, you'd run your PropelZ instance there. But the more we engaged with customers, the more we started getting requests for other platforms, and suppose my data is on a Linux server, or wherever it happens to be. And we took a look at the core architecture, and it occurred to us there's really not very much that we do that's specifically tied to ZOS. I mean, some things are. The way you do vSAM IO is really different than the way you do any other kind of IO on other platforms. But we were able to create a version of PropelZ that doesn't have any of those ZOS dependencies. And that's exactly what we've done here. In fact, we talk about it as a Linux product or a Windows product, but really what it is, it will run anywhere you have a standard Java runtime environment. So, certainly Linux and Windows are probably the most obvious ones, but pretty much it'll run on any platform that's got usable Java runtime. We've had conversations about AS400s or all sorts of different platforms. And again, as long as there's a reasonable up-to-date Java environment for the platform, will run there. So again, the value of what we do, other than this kind of universal nature, it basically means any type of data uh, going to any target. And now with what we've recently done here, it also means you can run it on any platform. So and it might even be that you are a mainframe customer, but you want to do your PropelZ work in a Linux engine, running Linux on your mainframe. Perfectly fine if you want to do that. Uh, you know the performance, no matter which you choose, is heavily optimized. We have specific examples at customer sites where they're doing. One example comes to mind where, with minimal setup and tuning, they are able to do, I think their number is 26,000 rows per second to a cloud-based Postgres environment. And when we do that math, that's multiple terabytes an hour going through PropelZ. We had a more recent deployment where during the proof of concept, the customer had a solution that they did the way Dusty described. They hand built something using all sorts of file transfer logic and other vendor products and all of that. They spent months doing that. They put us in the environment right out of the box. We were 150 to 200% the throughput that their current solution was getting. So, and again, that's before they do any tuning or optimization really anywhere, network or on the target or anywhere else. So I think that's really the strength, super high performance data movement, run it anywhere that you want, handle any type of input and talk to any type of output.
That was a great overview. How about anything you'd highlight from kind of the security standpoint? I know we've talked a lot about kind of the mainframe posture of security. Um, Anything you'd want to highlight from kind of an integration? I know we've talked about kind of masking concepts or those types of things. Anything on the multi-platform side of PropelZ you would highlight or
Yeah,
address?
well, certainly a couple of things. One is that everyone on the planet is concerned about the security of their data. So what we do is uh, when you're talking to a particular target, really any type of security that target supports, we can be configured to work with. Pretty commonly, again, I mentioned this before. Most typically people go to databases with their data, and in that case, all the things with SSL or TLS protection for the network traffic, certificate-based identities, user authentication to validate that whoever's running PropelZ has proper authorization to access that database. All of that's supported as you would expect. And again, sometimes you want to go the other way. Sometimes you're going to an on-prem database that's 20 feet away from whatever server you're running PropelZ on. We can do that too. If you have let's say a VPN that you've invested in and it's providing network security, no reason to have the extra overhead of us doing it as well. So, very flexible, and I think you'll find that really whatever security options are possible to the target is usable with PropelZ. On the other side of it too, I mean, one of the interesting things that we do is sometimes we hear, I have this binary file I need to get into a database for, I don't know, I'm going to import the data into an AI application or something like that. But I don't need all 200 fields. And in fact, there might be sensitive data in that record that I'd like to filter out. So the way we work with the metadata that describes what those records look like, you can very easily tell us, bring, I don't know, name and address, but not social security number, or whatever the details are. You can do that field by field. So I can have one input file and different metadata depending on what I need to do with it. So maybe what I'm going to push into my AI system gets sanitized, and it's just certain columns out of that data. Maybe what goes into, maybe I migrated some app to some other platform, it's running in the cloud, it does need all of that data. I can absolutely do that in PropelZ. I can have kind of different views of the same data depending on what the security needs of the target are. You can also do filtering as well. You might, it's not uncommon to have binary files that might have different types of data in them, different record types, for instance. So, again, absolutely, you can filter them and say, process these, but not these. And again, that gives you a lot of control over what goes to the target, both from a security and a performance point of view. You may have a file that's terabytes long, and when you look at it, the application that processes that data might not need all of that. It might only need a small subset of that data. So you can tell PropelZ, just go get the records that look like this. Use the metadata so that you're only getting a handful of columns out of that. And then the traffic to the target can be very, very small and much, much faster performance than would otherwise be the case. That's a really important distinction. A lot of folks who just do, let's say you just did a standard file transfer to the target, typically that means you're going to move entire copies of files somewhere and deal with all the things I'm talking about once the data gets there. In our case, you don't have to transmit that data that you don't need. And that's, a major, major contributor to, performance, especially if you got massive volumes of data to move.
So Vince, is there any major differences between multi-platform PropelZ and the mainframe version of PropelZ that customers should be aware of? And
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the one thing I would call out is that the biggest difference, if we look at the way mainframe applications do I/O and the way virtually every other platform does I/O, is that on the mainframe you have this concept that data is organized into records. When I access, let's say a VSAM file, I can read it record by record, and that's probably uh, a distinction that's not really possible on other platforms. On most Unix type platforms, a file is just a stream of bytes, one after the next after the next. Especially a binary file. Sometimes you could think of a text file as organized into records. And the new line characters kind of act as the delimiters from one record to the next. But with binary data, that's a lot more complex. So the distinctions that we have between what we've done on the mainframe and what we do on all the other platforms really comes down to that. You'll find, like in the Linux products, there are additional options to tell us how do you want to kind of decompose your input file, which could just be this ugly stream of bits into records. And there are a variety of ways you can do that. You can tell us, it is a text file. And in that case, we can look for, line delimiters. We can break that file down into lines, and each line acts like a record. You can tell us that it's, fixed length, basically arrays. So, you can tell us that it's, I don't know, 80 character records, one after the next, packed into a big array and that's what's stored on disk, and we'll do the correct thing there. Or you can tell us something a little bit more complicated. You could tell us that the length of each record is embedded in the record itself, and you can give us an offset and the size of the length field, and we'll decompose all of that. That again, that's very similar to mainframe style variable length records, where you commonly have, here's the first couple of bytes of the record has a length, and then you have the actual data for the record. Any of those methods can be used, but on the ZOS implementation, we're able to do all of that automatically, because typically files are organized into records. On other platforms, you have to tell us about that. So that's the bulk of the difference right there. The architecture, as I described, the input stage, the processing stage, the output stage, that's exactly the same. The facilities available are the same. The JDBC layers are the same. All of the behaviors that I've been talking about work exactly the same way. The difference just is how we interpret the input files. And by the way, even the metadata is the same format. I mean, we wanted to use metadata that customers would typically have already. So in our case, what we do is we use basically they look like COBOL copybooks. And in fact, if you have a COBOL copybook and you can say, this file is mapped by this COBOL copybook, that's all you need to do is give us that. That works on Linux as exactly the same way as it works on ZOS. So, I would say 90% is exactly the same across platform, and where the differences exist, it really comes down to this limitation, because you don't have a record construct on other platforms, at least on most other platforms. But yeah, other than that, I mean, even the packaging is the same, the installation is the same. It's very, very simple to get up and running, as I've described. We ship you on Linux. It's actually in the form of your package manager. There are actually two choices there. There's one choice that's just a tar file, but if you're using APT or one of the other RPM on Red Hat, I mean, we can also give you that in the package manager's format. So it's really as simple as APT install PropelZ, and you're up and running at that point. So very very easy to get going that way. If you've got connections to the target databases you want to use, you can just keep right on reusing them. There shouldn't be anything different that we need. A lot of customers, especially mainframe customers, they may have never thought about, how do I directly connect my mainframe to a Postgres database running in the Google Cloud. So that's that first time, they'll have some work to do to make sure that they have the right, digital certificates to get secure communication and, connection options and all of that. But, if you're already doing that, there's nothing different about PropelZ than any other, JDBC based application would be. You can be up and running, literally in, minutes or hours, not, days, weeks, months. So yeah, and everything, I should mention that too. Everything with what we do is declarative. What I mean by that is it's configuration data. It's not code. It's you tell us, here's my layout of my data. That doesn't mean you build a program to do that. That means you point us to something that looks like a COBOL syntax that, here are all my fields and their lengths and their data types. Uh, Same thing with the connections. Here's the name of the target I want to go to and the credentials I want to use. It truly is zero code that way. Most of it can be done, literally right on the command line. It doesn't have to be really any more complicated than that. But at the same time, if your goal is to integrate that with I don't know, production workflow management products, or some type of job scheduling software, that's easy to do too. It's just the command line that you're doing. So yeah, I mean that productivity is an important point. I mean, Dusty will probably share an example that he and I heard together, where a customer had spent 2 years trying to get an ETL solution working, and pretty much they gave up. There were just so many kind of creeping operational problems that they were running into. They could never quite get it to work. And this wasn't a small company with three guys in a garage trying to do it. This was a very large financial services company that, and honestly, they were some of the sharper people I've ever come across. So, I mean, it's you could just sense the frustration dripping. And the funny thing is, we said, look, you could be up and doing this tomorrow. And of course, they didn't believe us because of the pain they had been through. But that's pretty much been our
Yeah.
experience everywhere we go. So
Yeah, they had a very capable SI engaged as well, and that was helping them. And it was, yeah, they actually abandoned that product and solution after that 2 year period. So
yeah,
Vince, that was perfect. You transitioned right into this slide, but I wanted to just mention a couple things here too. Um, if you're actually a hosting customer of Kyndryl, you can basically get Propels on demand with Kyndryl today as well through our partnership with them. So that's, you don't even have to, really touch it, install it. You can have it available to you in a moment. And the other thing is that, what Vince was saying about, hours and days, most of our POCs and our proof, those proof of concepts are, without any enhancements, they're closing in days, right? A week or two at the most. And even with, some pretty complex scenarios and enhancements, those are closing within, 30 days. So these are not deep extended, and that's a credit to Vince and his team and what they can do. One, the foundation that they produced, and then some of these enhancements that have been requested by customers, which generally we bring to the generally available product. So it's not just one-off stuff. We evaluate whether that's a good enhancement for the entire customer base. So that's a huge advantage that we see. And as Vince said, a lot of people don't believe it, but then they put their hands on it and they get into it, and they're pretty amazed by that. So Vince, I'm gonna talk a little bit about pricing, and so this has changed a little bit. This is our current pricing as of recording this. And I'm going to ask you about Vince. Maybe I got the term wrong, but the multi-threading capability too in this context, because I think that's an extraordinary value that we provide. But anyways, we price this by it's a subscription license. It's priced by year, includes your license and maintenance, and it's really unlimited usage of Propel. So unlimited installations, unlimited use cases for this investment, and you can move as much data as you need to and as you want to. get to select one of our package pre-configured drivers out of the box, and you can see that list. And that may change a little bit over time. So you get one of those out of the box. We'll also we're happy to work on certifying drivers, or at least testing and making sure that they're serviceable to you if they're not within our catalog available to us. And these are very high powered commercial, very optimized drivers as well. So that's part of the secret sauce to our performance. But again, we'll do some of that work on an SOW basis, and nothing crazy, but you can add that on, or you can add on multiple drivers for, again, not a huge incremental amount. And then we do have some connectors, these API type scenarios. So the one that Vince mentioned today was Splunk. There's some other inputs and outputs that we're working on based on some customer requests. So keep an eye out. We publish all of this stuff on our website, so it's very transparent. You can always see exactly how we're pricing things. You don't have to guess, and what's available to you as part of the GA offering. So Vince, I did want to ask about, is that what you're calling it, kind of the multi-threading capability, or is it referred to as something different?
Well, we package it up, and it's called the multiplexer.
Multiplexer, thank you.
Yeah.
And
So,
you want to just describe what that kind of provides,
yeah,
and what that's meant for some of these customers that just have massive amounts of data and projects, that the deadlines that they're trying to cover.
yeah, and uh, and it's a good example of how we work. And we engaged early on with a handful of customers that seem to have the same use case, where they would have something like kind of I'm going to call it a legacy virtual tape environment, where they had literally millions of files scattered across whether it's physical device or logical devices. But their goal was to get that to something in cloud storage. And certainly, as you could imagine, that comes down to transfer all those files. And as I've described, PropelZ is a great solution for that. The problem is, a big part of the challenge in those kind of projects isn't just move the files. It's how do I get the inventory of what I need to move? And when I get that inventory, it's going to be millions of files potentially. So what we did was we created a way inside of PropelZ where you could tell us, instead of trying to do that file at a time, here's a inventory, a list, and again, it could be a million deep, and they're basically just a list of file names that you want. And then you get to tell us, here's how I want you to process those in parallel. And what that means is basically, run them, 10 at a time or 100 at a time, or whatever your infrastructure can handle. You can do them all in parallel. And then, that list of a million files becomes kind of like a queue to be serviced by many instances of PropelZ. And each instance, takes one off that list, does what it's supposed to do, and goes back and gets the next one as quickly as possible. So it's one big, enormous task, and it executes in parallel, as I've described. Now, the reason we do this is, we see, PropelZ is not an enormous CPU consumer, and a lot of applications this way. Usually the limitation is the network bandwidth that you've got. How quickly can I pump data over your network? Especially when, let's talk Linux for a moment. Let's especially when that's encrypted traffic going out, over network wire. That's it can be a lot of data, and depending on how much bandwidth you have, that's going to be the constraint. So a lot of customers tell us, look, I got all of this bandwidth, maybe I've got, 10 pipes between my site and the target, but I don't want to just use one of them. I want to use 10 of them. And it turns out because PropelZ is a low CPU consumer, you actually could run 10 or 100 in parallel. And you'll definitely get that elapsed time down dramatically that way. And again, it really will depend on how much bandwidth, how much CPU power, how big are the files you're dealing with. All of that comes into play. But it is very optimized for that case where geez, I'm not just moving one file to the cloud. I've got thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions that I've got to get to whatever target is in mind. So yeah, those are that's today that's an optional PropelZ feature. It certainly started on ZOS because ZOS is very good at doing parallel things this way. But no reason a Linux customer couldn't take advantage of that as well. So yeah, I mean, that's, as Dusty said, that's a great example of how we work. We heard the requirement, made sense to us that, that's kind of a common need. And, we went off and created a solution to that. So, very typical way that we work that way. And the other thing I just want to get in quickly is that the other benefit of PropelZ is that most of what we do is open and not proprietary. So let's say you need to connect to, I don't know, some type of database or some type of target that we don't support. You're not dependent on us to do that. I mean, certainly, as Dusty described, we'd be happy to have that conversation with you. And if we can find a way to do it, we'll definitely do it. But if you wanted to write that yourself, or you had an SI in the middle who was able to do that, or whoever it is able to do that, it's not like some of our competition where the protocols are so proprietary, you're kind of locked into them doing it. With us, and that's the same thing on the inputs and the outputs. You want to do kind of very unusual things for input or output. We'll show you how to do it if we can't do it for you. And I think that's a really important point, especially at sites that may have spent generations customizing everything they do, and they have a lot of complexity to deal with, a lot of whatever it is, unique configurations that nobody supports out of the box. So yeah, definitely worth having a conversation if you're in any of those positions. So Dusty, let me shut up. I'll give it back to you. I've been
Yeah,
rambling
no,
a bit.
that was great. Yeah, I'll just wrap it up here. So I just wanted to mention, we've talked a lot about PropelZ today, but we have a full portfolio of data integration, data movement, data access products um, for integrating with mainframe and multi-platform now as well. And so we can solve just about any data access need you have, particularly to and from the mainframe. But yeah, again, we're getting into some other platforms here with multi-platform PropelZ, and there's a lot of resources out there on each of those. So demos on demand for each of those products, tons of webinars. The podcast I mentioned, and the other thing about the podcast, which is called Skyward Data, it's available on all the podcast platforms. Um, Skyward Data also has some really great guests that we've had, and so just talking about the industry, data, mainframes, etc. So go check that out. And then we have um, really a customer briefing center that's on demand. So we really strive for being very transparent, provide you the data that you can access as you need it and want to consume it. So there's just a ton of resources on our website for that, and numerous blogs. The other thing I just want to mention is we referenced a lot about performance today as well. And so there's a webinar and a podcast of uh, Mark Sokol and I, our chairman, talking through some of the results of some recent customer projects around performance that are just they're pretty mind blowing. Vince, I know as we came out of some of the lab testing as um, uh, releasing these products, you were pretty blown away. But now that we're seeing, these implemented in these different use cases, it's pretty remarkable. So go check that out if you're interested in the performance. Okay, thanks a lot, Vince, for joining me. Feel free to reach out to us. You can test these products as well. Email us at hello@virtualz.com if or we have web forms, so there's multiple ways to get a hold of us if there's anything you're interested in talking about, and just bringing a use case to us. We love talking through those um, and considering those, even if it doesn't, even if it just leads to us thinking about our products a little differently. So, again, thanks, Vince. Have a great day.